Hi, folks. Thank you all very much for coming. Show of hands, how many of you are feeling really stressed right now? Okay, you've come to the right place. I think I want to point out too that as a social psychophysiologist, one of the key ways that we stress people out in the lab is by making them give public speeches. So if I start sweating profusely, that's where I'm at. But no, seriously, I think hopefully some of the things that I'm going to share with you today you can take into your lives, make stress your friend, find ways to cope, and improve your health and well-being, and maybe even add a few years to your life if you so desire. So let's see, let's start. So I'm going to start by defining what is stress and also what is a stressor. And I know that this might seem a bit silly. Most of us know what these two things are, but I want to just make sure we have a similar language that we're using throughout this talk. I'm then going to talk about how stress harms us, and then I'll get into sort of probably the more interesting bits that you're here for, which is what can we do to manage our stress. Okay? So I'm going to talk about something we refer to as stress inoculation, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you have repeated exposures to moderate amounts of stress under certain conditions, it can actually help you to regulate stress in the future. I'm also going to talk a bit about the way that we might change our perceptions of the stressors we have to face so that we no longer feel threatened by them. And then something that's dear to my heart is this notion that we can actually share in the affect and the arousal of the people that we're socializing with. This is something we sometimes refer to as physiological synchrony. It's also referred to sometimes as stress contagion, depending on the context. So I'm going to get into that toward the end. I'll pause for questions, and I'm going to try and constrain the amount of time that I have for questions because I want to make sure that we get a chance to meditate together as well. Okay, so that will be the last thing that we do. All right. So what is stress? So I'm going to define it as the degree to which people must change or adapt to maintain balance or homeostasis. Okay? Stress can be psychological or physiological, and oftentimes it's both. Stress can be positive or negative, and stress can be acute or chronic. So it can be something that's short-term, like giving this talk, or something more chronic, like living in a war-torn country. Okay. What is a stressor? Well, it's exactly like it sounds. It's anything that causes stress. Okay. So this could be an event. And as I mentioned before, sometimes stress can be positive. So an event like a marriage, which is largely a positive experience, can be quite stressful, but so can divorce, right? There can be environmental stressors like extreme noise or extreme temperatures. And then even our thoughts can be stressful. So if we're worrying about things, that can induce a stress response. Psychological stress is our psychological reactions to the demands that are placed upon us. Okay? And how stressed we become psychologically can depend on our perceived ability to meet the demands of a stressor. Okay? So in these two images here, you can see the image on the left. People are looking pretty stressed and worried. They're probably feeling quite threatened. On the right, it's an image of people that are looking quite poised and confident, right? And we can approach our stressors in either of those two ways. Physiological stress is the extent to which our body must adapt to regulate its processes to maintain balance, okay? So these systems worked really well for us in the past, right? If we were out in the woods hunting and a wild animal came after us, we would want a very robust stress response. We'd want our sympathetic nervous systems to engage. We'd want cortisol flowing through our veins to help mobilize resources for us to either fight the wild animal or run away from it. But what's happening in modern times is that these stress systems are being chronically activated because of the modern lifestyle. And this is why we're dying earlier in many cases. Diseases are more lifestyle diseases than they were a long time ago. All right. So I want you to consider two ways to think about stress. So I've already alluded to this. There's acute stress, which are these short-term stressors. And then there's chronic stress, okay? So I give this example of a person being pulled over as an example of chronic stress because what I'm really referring to here is discrimination, okay? So being pulled over by a police officer one time is an acute stressor, but if this is happening on a regular basis, and especially if it's a function of your skin color or your ethnic group membership, this is now a chronic stressor, okay? And this is really problematic for health and well-being. Chronic stressors result in an elevated state of stress arousal, and this damages the body. Okay? It reduces the body's ability to flexibly respond to future stressors, and it has implications for health and well-being. Okay? So chronic stressors, like discrimination, reliably predict poor health. They're associated with the development of cardiovascular disease, suppressed immune system functioning, and sleep impairment. Okay, so why is this the case? Whenever we become stressed, our body releases catabolic hormones, okay? These are also known as the breaking down hormones. These hormones break down fat and muscle tissue and convert it into stores of energy that we can use, as I mentioned, to deal with the stressor that is before us, okay? At the same time, there are anabolic hormones that are released. These are the building up hormones, okay? So these hormones synthesize complex molecules to build up tissue, so rebuilding the organs that have been damaged through the expression of the cortisol, okay? Now, in order to rebuild these tissues, adequate recovery is required. Okay? Chronic stress interferes with this recovery. And so this is kind of the crux of it. If we're not allowing ourselves adequate opportunities to recover, we're going to end up with ill health. Okay? So what can we do to prevent the harms of stress? So one of the things that I mentioned already was stress inoculation. Stress inoculation, sometimes referred to as physiological toughening, is the idea that consistent exposure to stressors, but under the right conditions, can allow us to thrive physiologically. Okay? It makes our stress response systems more flexible and better able to respond to stressors. Okay? So then you might be asking, what are the right conditions to experience stress? Okay? So as I've already mentioned, we don't want to face stress chronically, but acute stressors are okay. Okay? So stressor exposure produces initial short-term catabolic processes, as I mentioned, but they are opposed by greater anabolic processes. And these are the very processes that we require to sort of instantiate this process of toughening of these stress systems. Chronic stress blocks anabolic processes from encouraging this toughening to occur. We also want repeated exposure to acute stressors, okay? So toughening up the stress response systems requires this repeated exposure to catabolic hormones complemented by the anabolic processes. And the reason we know this is true. There's a lot of research in humans, but some of the earliest work was done in animals. So you can see this researcher here on the left side of the screen is handling a rat. I should say, by the way, all these images were created with ChatGPT, so they're not real people. So I want to describe some of this research because it's classic work that demonstrated that when animals were under certain types of stress, it resulted in either maladaptive responses or adaptive responses. And so in one such study, animals that were under chronic stress, they essentially developed this sense of learned helplessness, okay? Animals, however, that were handled frequently, so an intermittent sort of acute stressor, ended up being more resilient. Okay? So here's one of the studies that I want to talk to you about, okay? So the methods, they had rat pups that were either handled or not for 20 days, okay? So the infant rats were taken from their mother in the handled condition and simply put into a cage by themselves for 3 minutes and then returned to the nesting cage. The pups that were not handled, they just stayed with their mother the entire time. And this occurred every day for 20 days, okay? In adulthood, the rats were placed in a novel environment similar to what's on the screen here. And the scientists examined levels of activity, so whether they felt safe enough to explore this novel environment, whether they defecated, Okay, so in animals, if they're frightened or fearful, they're more likely to defecate. And then at the end of the study, they also examined their cortisol levels. And what they found was that the pups that were handled were more active in this novel space. They were less likely to defecate, and they had lower cortisol levels. Okay? So taken together, everything that I've said so far, I just want to make sure, because I've covered a lot of stuff, we want to avoid chronic stress, but acute stress is okay. And it's the reason we want exposure or repeated exposure to acute stressors is because it necessitates these opposing anabolic processes. But there's one other thing that we can do, and that's schedule time for relaxation. Okay? And this is critical. Chronic stress and related wear and tear must be low in order for us to mobilize these anabolic processes. Okay? So restorative breaks from stress will encourage these rejuvenating homeostatic mechanisms to occur. And one possible form of rejuvenation that you can engage in is meditation. Okay? People who meditate have lower resting cortisol levels, and they also have heightened activity in brain regions associated with stress regulation, among many other positive benefits that I won't go into right now. Okay? So, quick summary. Consistent exposure to stress under the right conditions can cause physiological toughening. Acute intermittent stress necessitates opposing anabolic systems that encourage this resilient stress response. And this makes the stress response more efficient and adaptive and less damaging in the long term. Okay? So the tips that I have for you, you have 3 tips that you're going to leave with today. Tip number 1 is to seek periods of deep relaxation daily to initiate a robust anabolic response. And I would say to do this especially after exposure to an acute stressor. Okay? So after this talk, I'm going to go to my lab and I'm going to just chill out for about 10 or 15 minutes. Okay? I mean that. Okay. So now I want to talk a bit about how we can change our mindset with respect to the stressors that we experience. Okay? So I've already showed these images to you before, but I want to reiterate. Some people will, when they face a stressor, they're going to handle it with confidence. They feel like they're well prepared to deal with the demands of the stressor. Other folks less so. They might feel overwhelmed. And this doesn't matter if it's objectively true or not. Okay? You might be very well prepared for the demands of a stressor, but you don't perceive yourself as such, and that's going to undermine your performance and ultimately your well-being. Okay? So we refer to these different mindsets or states of mind as challenge and threat. Okay? In a challenge state, you perceive yourself as having the resources required to meet the demands of the stressor. Okay? And in the threat state, you perceive yourself as lacking the resources that are required to meet the demands of the stressor. And this is actually a really profound thing because depending on your state of mind, your body will either work for you, it will work against you. Okay? So research has shown that when you are confronting a stressor, the heart pumps with greater force. Okay? But the blood vessels dilate when you're challenged. Okay? They get bigger, and as a result, there's more blood flowing to your brain and to the peripheries. And this actually enhances your mental and physical performance. Okay? If you enter the threat mindset, what ends up happening is that the heart still contracts with greater force, right? In both contexts, you're confronting a stressor. But here the blood vessels constrict. They get smaller, okay? And less blood goes to the brain and the peripheries, okay? This dulls your thinking and slows your physiological performance. So I want to demonstrate this to you folks in a pretty interesting study. Came out in 2004. They wanted to know whether challenge or threat motivational states would predict performance in varsity athletes in an upcoming competitive season. So what they did was they had participants or athletes come to the lab. These were female softball team athletes. And they were asked to give a speech about a time when it was a pivotal moment in the playoffs and to describe their feelings. And throughout this speech task, they recorded a range of cardiovascular measures to quantify these profiles of challenge and threat. And then they asked the athletes to report the runners batted in the upcoming season. And what they found, you can see on this graph here, on the bottom or the horizontal axis, the far left is people who are the most threatened, and on the far right, it's those who are the most challenged during the speech. And on the vertical axis, you can see the number of runs that were created. And you can see that those who were threatened produced far fewer runs in the upcoming season than did those who were challenged. Okay? So it's a pretty strong evidence, I think, of the harms that can occur if you confront your stressors with the wrong mindset. Okay? All right, so I'm going to quickly summarize this section. Psychological responses to stressors can vary according to your perceptions, and largely the perceptions of the resources that are available to you to confront the stressor. Perceiving resources that meet or exceed the demands of the stressor tends to enhance your ability to cope with the stressor, and perceiving inadequate resources can actually undermine your ability to cope. All right, so here's your take-home tip number 2. Build your psychological resources, okay? So if you know that you have some demand coming up, like you're giving a talk, make sure that you're prepared for it, right? Otherwise, your body's going to work against you. Now, I recognize that this can't be true of all demands, right? We can't necessarily predict all of the stressors that are going to emerge in our life, and many of them can be beyond our control no matter how prepared we feel. So I think the next best thing for you to do is to ensure that you have a strong social support system, maybe even start developing certain meditation or regulation type skills. And there may even be other types of resources available to you that I haven't thought of. In fact, one that just came to mind, of course, many of you probably know that exercise is very good for helping to manage stress, okay? And then I just want to reiterate that sometimes perceptions can matter a lot more than what's actually objectively true in terms of your ability to cope with the demands of a stressor. All right, so moving on to the last bit of information that I want to share with you. You may recall that on the past slide, I noted that social support can be an excellent resource to draw from. Unfortunately, that's not always true. Sometimes we seek social support and we don't necessarily get what we're looking for. And I want to mention that in addition to people not always being supportive, people can also bring their own stress into your life, right? There are certain theories. One's called the stress spillover theory, and it's this idea that when you're stressed and you come home, you start behaving in ways that stress other people out. And this is all a very robust field of inquiry, and that's important to have in the back of the mind. But what I'm actually going to talk about today is something more subtle, which is that our stress can actually transmit to other people, okay? Stress can actually be contagious, right? You don't even necessarily have to know that someone has been through a stressor, and you can pick up their stress arousal. But I want to end on a good note, too, that I think calm can also be transmitted between people. And I'm going to finish up this talk by presenting just a couple of studies that demonstrate both of these things. Okay? So the first study is one of my favorites, actually, for demonstrating this, looked at stress contagion between mothers and their infants. Okay? The basic paradigm was that they had mothers go into a room separated from their infant to give a speech. Okay? And in one condition, they gave the speech in front of positive evaluators, so they would nod their head a lot and smile, make them feel like they're doing a good job. Still stressful because they're being evaluated, but not as stressful as in the negative evaluation condition, where the experimenters would stand with their arms crossed and their faces would be quite flat, maybe even shaking their heads in disapproval. Okay, which hopefully none of you will do. So far, no one has been doing this, but I'd appreciate it for the last 10 minutes. We keep it that way. And then so throughout this speech, and then I should say that the mothers and the infants were reunited. Okay, throughout this speech and during the reunification, both the mother and the infant had their stress arousal continuously recorded. Okay, and it was similar type of measures as in the softball study. And this is what they found. It's really quite remarkable. So I'll start with the figure on the far left. The white bar is mothers who were in the positive evaluation condition, and that's their stress physiology there. And the The horizontal line is their baseline value, so it was their stress at rest. So you can see that it's actually quite a substantial deviation from their resting arousal state. But if you go to the middle bar, you can see that's where the mothers who are in the negative evaluative condition, and they're extremely stressed. They're more stressed than they were at baseline. They're more stressed than the folks that were in the positive evaluative condition. And then the last bar are the folks that were in the control condition. So really not much of a change from the resting baseline. Okay. So that's the one we're focusing on. The middle figure, it's the infant's heart rate after they were reunified with their mothers, okay? So you can see the leftmost bar, there's a little bit of a deviation from baseline, but it's actually statistically not meaningful. But for the mothers who were in the negative evaluative condition, they were the infants were quite stressed relative to their resting baseline. And in fact, in the control condition, you can see that they were actually less stressed than they were at the initial baseline recording. But what's really fascinating is this far right graph where you can see this dashed line here. This is the correlation between mother's stress response and the stress response of their infants over the course of the time of unification. So this horizontal axis here is time in 30-second intervals. And you can see that the longer they're spending together, the more correlated their stress response is becoming, suggesting that the infants are actually picking up the stress arousal of their mothers. Okay? Why is this so exciting and fascinating? Well, infants don't know a lot yet, right? They don't know that their mother is in this other room exposed to a stressor. Even if the mother comes back and says, wow, I was just experiencing this crazy stressor, it's not likely that that's going to resonate with the infant, right? There's something more tactile, much lower level, that is being conveyed from the mother to the infant that's resulting in this stress contagion, okay? But like I said, I want to end on a good note. So I'm going to talk about one last study that demonstrates that we can also share in peaceful experiences in a collective way. So this is a study that I was involved with a collaborator named Catherine Tamminen at the University of Toronto. And what we did was we had a varsity men's volleyball team meditate collectively before their practices during a season. These meditations were led by the coach, and throughout the meditation, we actually measured their heart rate continuously. Okay? At the end of the meditation, they carried on with their practice as usual, and at the end of the practice, both the athletes and the coaches completed ratings of performance of the athletes throughout the practice period. And what we found was that across the season, so this actually happened at multiple practices across the entire season, we found that across the season, athletic performance was highest when synchrony and heart rate was high. Okay? So meditating together before the practice actually happened was predictive of how well the athletes performed as a function of whether or not collectively their heart rates were synchronizing. All right, so to summarize, people can transmit their stress to social partners. Okay? People need not be aware that their partner was even exposed to a stressor for this to occur. But feelings of calm may also be shared, and I think that that's an important thing to sort of drill in and highlight. Okay? So this is your final tip for today. So I'd like you to think about stress and calm as a collective experience, okay? Take time to bask in the positive feelings that others have to share, and share your own, go out of your way to share your own sense of calm, peace, and joy, okay? And I also want to note that although it's important to be mindful that your stress can transmit to people around you, I don't want you to leave here feeling guilty about it, okay? Stress is a normal thing to experience, and you also don't want to suppress your negative feelings, okay? That's actually, it's just going to make you more stressed, okay? What you should do in light of this information is try to find constructive ways to manage your stress for your own sake as well as the people that are around you, okay? And I like to think of this as sort of like stress hygiene, right? We brush our teeth because we want to have healthy teeth, but we also don't want to offend people, right? So I think you can think of your stress in a similar way. Okay. So taking it all home, these are the last couple of slides. Chronic stress damages the body, and it can lead to ill health and disease. Acute intermittent stressors, however, can toughen up the stress systems, creating resilience to future stressors. How stressed we become and how well we cope can depend on whether we take time to relax, can be affected by our self-perceptions, so our perceptions of whether we have what it takes to meet the demands of a stressor, and it can impact our social partners. Okay. So just a reminder of the tips. To manage chronic stress, we want to incorporate regular periods of relaxation to inoculate against future instances of stress. We want to build personal resources so that stressors become challenges and not threats. And we want to reimagine stress and coping as collective experiences where we might seek opportunities to share in the good feelings that others might have to share with us. And we want to manage our stress for the sake of ourselves and for others. And that is it. Thank you all very, very much. So we have time for probably, 5 or 10 minutes of questions, and then there's going to be a 10-minute guided meditation.
I can use my outdoor voice. Okay.
Yeah,
No problem. So one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about stress inoculation are those students that talk about procrastination and leaving things to last minute, and that kind of helps them. Would that be similar to stress inoculation in the sense that they are kind of priming themselves or putting them in an acute stressor situation and then hopefully allowing themselves to work through that stress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a definitive answer there. That seems like a question that could be tested empirically. But what I would say is that if they're not giving themselves opportunities to relax while they're procrastinating, it's probably not going to be beneficial. And I think also insofar as the longer you wait for something to do something that needs to be done, the more threatening it's going to become, right? Because if you think of time as a resource, you're running out of it, right? The longer you wait. And so, I would imagine that you if you had started on time, you'd probably feel more challenged than threatened. But I don't have a definitive answer for that, yeah.
Okay, my greatest fear, talking into a microphone. In terms of I'm thinking also from student perspectives, we have so many acute and chronic stressors throughout the day. How do you, is one meditation once a day good enough for this? Or is it more beneficial to be wow, I just wrote an exam, take 10 minutes. Okay, I just wrote an email, take 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I would say start small, right? You don't want this new relaxation routine to be another stressor for you, right? We actually did a study, we haven't published it yet, but we were looking at meditation amongst med school interns, and we found that those who had the expectation that they had to meditate every day were more distressed over the course of the study than those who just meditated when they felt like it. Yeah, so start small, okay? Incremental, 5-10 minutes. You'll be surprised. So I've been meditating for 20 years, and there's good days and bad days, right? There's days when I'd rather watch Netflix, right? But it does help with sleep. I really, truly try to do it every single day, even if just for a little bit. Okay, yeah. Other questions? Mike?
Yeah, I was just curious kind of about the binary versus dimensional nature of acute versus chronic stress, and more specifically, when does an acute stressor become chronic? Is there a time period? Is it when it's starting to interfere with your sleep, or it's more than 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah. That I don't know. I think, from a medical perspective, I'm sure that there are certain features of health that might suggest you've been exposed to it. In fact, there's one phenomenon that's reliably related with chronic stress, which is nocturnal blood pressure. So at the end of the day, our blood pressures normally drop about 10%, but people who are exposed to chronic stress don't experience that drop in blood pressure at the end of the day. So if I'm not a medical doctor, but I would think that if I was a physician and I knew this about one of my patients, that they've got some serious stress going on in their life. I think the other thing that's important to note too is sort of the timing of stressors, right? Major stressors earlier in life are going to be more difficult to manage than the same stressor at a later point in life when you've matured a little bit. So there's a lot of these really interesting timing issues, and I don't have a concrete answer for you, but it's a very good question. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how the feelings of calm can be shared. And then a lot of mindfulness training is moving to online platforms. Do you think that an online group class compared to an in-person one would have that shared calming effect would be less?
I do. I don't know with any certainty. I think that research needs to be conducted, but I mean, the fact that we can synchronize physiologically to me is very profound, and we actually don't know why it's happening. It could be tension-related processes, but it could even be we're picking up on people's smells, and those smells are signaling things to us to either bring up or bring down our arousal states. So I don't think that you shouldn't meditate online if that's the only option you have, but I think being in person maybe opens the heart a bit more, and yeah, it feels good. So, other questions? Yeah.
So we have a couple questions from the online group. So is bedtime the best time to meditate?
Yes and no. I think that meditating before bed is excellent for your sleep, but it's harder to sustain meditation right before bed because you're so sleepy. So if I could have it both ways, I'd do 10 minutes as soon as I wake up and 10 minutes before I go to bed, but that can be hard.
Another one, would you consider Tai Chi as meditative, or is this an individual response?
I suppose that depends on, yeah, I mean, I hear similar questions about like, is prayer the same thing as meditation? I think it depends on like, if we're doing a sort of scientific operationalization of things, then I'm going to say that we want to be quite precise, and I'd say no, it's not. They're not one and the same. There are clear differences, but there's certainly meditative components to Tai Chi, and so sort of speaking colloquially, I think that it's okay to consider Tai Chi as meditative. I'd probably even be okay with suggesting that prayer is a type of meditation, but I think, as scientists, we try to make things very, very precise in our definitions. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Chad. That was great. I hope you're not too stressed.
I feel good.
Maybe I'll send my calm to you.
Thank
But
you.
I was thinking about the contagion piece. And
Yeah.
so if you have somebody who's really stressed, but they're partnered with somebody who's really calm, is there any research about who
Yeah.
who wins the
Who wins
contagion
out?
war? Yeah.
That's a good question. There's a scholar named Emily Butler. She actually passed away recently, which is very sad. She was doing really exciting and novel research. So there's many different ways of modeling synchrony, and what she was doing was demonstrating how over the course of an interaction, one person in the partnership can actually either amplify or dampen the arousal state of their partner. But I don't know if there are any strong predictors yet, like personality types or this kind of thing, that would make one win out over the other person. Yeah. It's a very good question, and I think one thing that I can say that's sort of tangentially related, which I think a lot of people get excited about, this was one of the first studies on synchrony that was, the first study happened in about 1950, 1960, but the first study that was really quite famous or became quite popular was done in 1983 by Levinson and Gottman. They had romantic, or actually married couples come into their lab and talk about a non-conflict related issue and in addition to that, an issue that was a point of conflict within the relationship. And what they found was that couples that were dissatisfied in their relationship were more likely to synchronize during that conflict conversation. So this is, again, it's only tangentially related, but what it suggests to me is that in dissatisfied couples, when they're having an argument, they're both amping one another up over time, and thus they're dissatisfied, right? So anyways, yeah, great question, thank you. How much time do we have? I think maybe one more question, and then we should probably start the meditation. Yes, at the back?
I can talk loud. Is there a time or any studies? Is that time now? Okay, sorry. Thanks.
Are there studies that show the length of time at which somebody that's under chronic stress cannot recover? You know, get the illness is so great,
Right.
like living in a bad family situation, or you're saying war. Are there studies on that data?
I think that there must be. This is a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I know that people who have experienced trauma through a range of sort of therapeutic approaches, they can grow from the experience and hopefully to a certain extent recover. But there might also be individual differences in how successful people are in terms of the recovery, depending on in addition to the treatment they're receiving, just their own sort of resilience or circumstances. Yeah. Okay, thanks, folks. So I hope you'll all stick around. There's a 10-minute guided meditation. I'm not going to lead it. It's an audio file that's going to be played. You can just sit where you are comfortably and relaxed. This is actually an audio file that I used in a dissertation study of mine. I can affirm to you that it will elevate your parasympathetic nervous system response, so you are guaranteed to feel more relaxed leaving here than you did coming in. Okay, Mike, you can go ahead and start it.
Let's begin our meditation. Sit on a chair or on the floor, but above all, sit comfortably. If you sit on a chair, place your feet apart on the floor and flat. Whatever you choose, you should be comfortable and not distracted. Now place your hands on your lap, palms facing upwards. Begin by taking a few deep breaths. Slow, deep breaths inwards, pausing at the top of your breath, and then exhaling slow and long. Now close your eyes and bring your attention inwards. Here's where we begin. Start by allowing your shoulders to relax and fall into place. Allow the tension of your day to fall and roll off your shoulders. For this meditation, we will go through a few affirmations to settle our attention. First, leave your left hand open on the lap and place the right hand on your heart. In your heart, say to yourself, quietly, inward, say, "Let me feel the peace within myself. Let me feel the peace within." Repeat this 12 times. Now we bring our right hand across our forehead. At this point, we have to forgive. And we do that by saying, again, silently, inwardly, "I forgive everyone, and I forgive myself." Say this as many times as is necessary for you to begin feeling peaceful inside. Let go of any tensions, of any thoughts, and of any grudges. I forgive. Now we bring the palm of our right hand to the top of our head and press down firmly. Massage your head in a clockwise motion 7 times, each time saying, "Let me experience thoughtlessness." When you have finished this step, bring your hand down to your lap and sit a few moments while I guide you in the meditation. If you find it difficult to stop your thoughts, that's okay. Be patient. As your mind relaxes, your thoughts will lessen. We will try to remain in silence for the next 2 minutes. We will now begin a short visualization exercise. If you're sitting on the floor, place your palms flat on the ground. If you are sitting in a chair, allow your arms to hang gently by your sides, pointing your hands towards the ground. Just allow your arms to rest. Feel the gravity in your arms. Now imagine the gravity is pulling out of your body all the negativity from the day. Feel the earth absorbing all the bad feelings, anxieties, insecurities, and guilt from the day. Allow all the tension to release. And in your heart, you can say, "Please allow all the tension of my day to be absorbed by the earth." Feel the tension leaving your body. Now place your hands on your lap again, palms facing upwards. Place your attention on the feelings in your body, the sensations in your hands, and the feelings at the top of your head. Hold your attention on the crown of your head. If you find this difficult to do, again, place your hand on your head and try to hold your attention there. We will meditate in silence for another few minutes. When you feel peaceful and relaxed, you may slowly open your eyes. But be still. Try not to think or speak too much at this moment. Allow yourself to enjoy the silence of your mind as you become aware of your surroundings.
Thank you all very much.